Welcome to Transformational Blueprints, the podcast that's here to tackle the big question. Why do so many transformation programs fall short, and what can we do about it? I'm Mario Michaels, founder and director of Synaxia Group, and I'm thrilled to have you join me. In this series, we go beyond theory, bringing you first-hand stories and insights from some of the world's top architecture and transformation leaders. It's all about sharing real-world lessons, sparking fresh ideas, and giving back to the architecture community. So whether you're looking to learn, be inspired, or stay ahead of the curve, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive in together. Hello everyone, today we'll be talking to Dileep Marway about enterprise architecture and why it is key to digital transformations. Dileep has 18 years of technical expertise in technology and is currently supporting Currys with their enterprise architecture transformation via And Digital. In the past, he's led large teams, he's cultivated teams that are based on trust, empowerment, and continuous learning. In addition to his professional work, he coaches and mentors individuals to reflect on their past and shape their future. So welcome to the show, Dileep.
Thanks for having me, Mario. I'm very excited.
Good. Well, we always start with a bit of background. How did you get to where you are now?
I'd probably say so. It's my career journey is a bit of an odd one. So I was very scientific.
Yep.
I actually studied pharmacy and didn't enjoy it. And then I moved to computer science. And essentially, I've taken all of those scientific aspects with me. Mm-hmm. And that's really shaped my career in terms of having that attention to detail.
Okay.
Really being very clear on the input and outputs. So yeah, my career started off in quality assurance. Mm-hmm. Then I went and did a bit of engineering, a bit of data science, a bit of product, a bit of delivery. Mm-hmm. And then I started to set up teams into my career. And that started off namely with Ernest Jones and H. Samuel, whereby I was setting up a testing team using store staff as my testers because we didn't have the budget to set up a team. So that was pretty innovative.
Yep.
And then I'd say my big break came in I think it was around about 2018, 2019, where I helped to set up The Economist as an engineering center of excellence with another counterpart. And yeah, it's got me to this point now in terms of I've done very strategic roles.
Yep.
And that's why enterprise architecture has worked really well in terms of aligning that business sense and also that technical sense. And I like to think of it, Mario, in my head as sort of you've got a building.
Yep.
And you've got the C-suite on that top level.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing is I'm sometimes going to that top level and I'm saying, okay, let me look at the strategy. Let me look at where the tech's going. Mm-hmm. Let me see what matters to C-suite users. And then I'm going down the lift and I'm going down into the trenches. I'm looking at the tech and then I'm coming back up. So for me, an enterprise architecture role is great.
Yeah.
Because I think that going up and down the elevators, so to say, they're the elevators that I'd done in my career throughout. So I'm managing to utilize all those levels, which is great.
And I'm looking forward to this one because you very much come from a technical background. And you know, there's always a contention between engineering and architecture and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a good conversation. Alongside this, I think it's probably worth mentioning you're an advisory council member at Harvard Business Review, and you're also an official member of the Forbes Technology Council as well. So kind of you know your onions, so to speak. So just so we can add a bit of context and so people understand what you're currently doing at the moment. Just tell us a little bit about your remit at And Digital.
Sure. So my role at And Digital is I essentially help CTOs, CIOs, and execs with their problem statements. And essentially, it's taking those problem statements and utilizing my knowledge and skill set from the past, making sure that I ask the right questions and I help them to deal with some of their problems. So as you can imagine with businesses right now, they may have questions about how do I move to a SaaS platform? Mm-hmm. How do I use AI? How do I forward plan my architecture such that it will meet our needs?
Yep.
And I think having that quality mindset has been very key because I'd say quality has been the overlay that allows me to really think in the user's perspective. And that's what really matters to people, right? When you have a product, quality matters.
Yeah, of course it does. Okay. Now in this series, we're starting every episode with a question from the previous guest. Your question, Dileep, is what kinds of measures do you use to know that architectural decisions are having the desired impact?
Great question. Great question. So I'd say for me, I think you break it out into categories. Firstly, in terms of if you look at it from a customer's perspective, firstly, it's a good idea to understand, are your stakeholders happy? Does your monitoring and alerting tell you that you've got performance issues, or have you got any security flaws? So I think actually understanding the end user state is the first thing I'd say. Then I'd break out into two categories. So you've got technical measures, you've got things like what's the performance, what's the reliability, what's the scalability, how secure is it? But then also from an enterprise architecture perspective, and this is why I enjoy the role so much, you also have to think about the business impact. So what's the cost efficiency? What's my time to market? Am I actually getting things out the door? Well, is my competitor getting there before me and I've lost all of these great customers? What's the customer satisfaction? And also the big one, how much revenue am I making? So for me personally, in the role that I'm doing now, in any decisions that I'm making, I'm having to make sure, does it tick the box from a user perspective? Yes or no? Let's break it down. Does it tick the box from a business impact perspective? And go through that. And then does it tick the box from a technical perspective as well? So I think overlaying all of that together will give you a good grasp. I think what's really important using my career is DevSecOps. And because I set up the DevSecOps team, because we overlaid the team with DevSecOps metrics, that really provided those technical measures such that enterprise architecture could then really focus on the business aspects. And that's a great way of doing it, because it's very hard for one team to do everything, right?
Yeah, of course it is. But surely based on that, then it's really hard to say, as a result of the EA doing this, the revenue has increased, because there's many other contributing factors to that. And I suppose the challenge we have, and we'll probably come on to this later on in the episode, is EA and the identity crisis that it currently has around value and not sitting in its ivory tower and rolling the sleeves up, and all these sort of words that people use and associate with enterprise architecture. So how can you directly link revenue, for example, to EA?
So I think for me, it's rather than just revenue, I'd probably say what really matters to those senior stakeholders. And if that senior stakeholder essentially says, yep, number one thing is revenue, then it's talking the same language in such a way that you're taking them on a journey. And how I answered to you, I gave you a lot of different areas, didn't I? I gave you things like revenue, I gave you customer satisfaction. So if you wanted to focus solely on revenue, it's looking at making sure, how are we actually working on the right things? Is the priority right? Is it going to bring value? But that isn't actually a task for an enterprise architecture in isolation. It's actually a task where you have to work with other people. And that's where I think sometimes there's a misconception in that if EAs are working solely in their isolated lanes, they're not taking people on the right journey. So their view of revenue could be very different to the view of, say, a business expert. I think what's really important is to speak the same language, go on the journey together, and then when people talk about revenue, they'll say, I understand revenue. I understand what revenue means to this EA, and this is why they've made this decision. This now makes more sense.
Okay. What do you think makes a great architect in today's world, Dileep?
I'd definitely say somebody who is inquisitive, somebody who's willing to learn. And I think that's an important thing for me, in that with the way that tech changes, and it changes so often, it's going to be impossible to know everything, right? So I think what's really important is somebody who asks the right questions, somebody who asks and understands, what are our goals? Does revenue matter to us? Or actually revenue doesn't matter at the moment because we've got loads of 2-star reviews on the App Store.
Because
we actually need to get our App Store rating up, and we need people to see that we're actually credible. So I think for me, it's making sure that architecture for me isn't about having all the answers. It's more so about being a great communicator, taking people on that journey, as we've said before, being humble enough to say, I don't know, and ask the right questions, and forming those bonds with the teams. I think what you don't want to do is make yourself sort of that team where everyone says they're the team who know everything, but they're not very collaborative. That's the worst place to be, right?
Okay. Most businesses these days are agile, or they work in an agile environment or an agile working way. Some argue enterprise architecture slows down agile processes.
Yes.
How do you see EA evolving to stay relevant in, a fast-moving agile environment?
So I think that there's a lot of sort of synergies in terms of an EA role and sort of actually moving towards agile. Because I think for me, it's making sure that, so an EA has to make sure that there's a strategic alignment. And EA has to make sure that we're forward planning. We're thinking about things in the future. Are we still going to be relevant? And at the same time, an EA really cares about that dependency management between systems. Now, without somebody doing those, you might think you're agile, but what you're actually doing is you're creating more technical debt such that you're going forward and then you're going backwards. So if you think of it a bit like a road, and I want to get from pillar 1 to pillar 5, I might get to pillar 3, but then I've created so much technical debt that I've gone back to pillar 2, or I've gone back to pillar 1. Well, I think for me, in terms of an enterprise architecture role, just having that strategic focus, really thinking about a faster time to market, thinking about cost efficiency, thinking about customers, I think that really helps in terms of the essence of agile working. It allows you to be flexible. It allows you to look at your systems. It allows you to say, these are your 5 options. We've actually selected option 1, but option 1 isn't working. We've got another option. We can be agile.
Okay. So, but how do you strike the balance between agility and governance, which is equally as important, without creating bottlenecks?
So some of the best architecture teams that I've seen, Mario, have been the ones where they've given guidance on the guardrails, but they haven't put in a hard sort of enforcement.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, imagine how annoying it'd be if you're a solution architect or an engineer, where you're being told you need to enforce all 50 of these rules. And you're just being forced down a certain avenue, right? So I think what's really important is, if you want that agility, it's fine to say, these are our business drivers. This is our view and this is how we want to move. But it's making sure that they're loose enough and there's not so much governance that you're having 20 meetings a day to try and sign things off.
Meetings about meetings' sake and so on and so forth. Okay, fine. Okay, that makes sense. So how do you measure the effectiveness then of EA in an agile organization or organizations to ensure it's adding value rather than creating an overhead? Because, it is seen as that luxury role whereby, can we do without it? A lot of people would argue yes, and then worry about the consequences of getting rid of your EA function or your EA afterwards once technical debt has increased and so on and so forth. So back to my sort of original question, is measuring the effectiveness of an EA to then show the value that it's adding. How do you do that without people thinking it's just an overhead, an unnecessary overhead?
I think for me, it's making sure firstly that it's actually tracking, like we mentioned before, it's tracking things like your technical debt. It's actually tracking things like, of all of the programs of work or projects that I've got going on, how many are actually on time? And it's actually delving into those and saying, why are they delayed? Are they delayed because we've made the wrong technical decision? Are they delayed because we've got too many escape defects? Are they delayed because partner said to use X? We've used X, but we can't seem to integrate it. There seems to be something that we're missing. So I think it's important to take learnings. And those learnings, I would say, is where enterprise architecture really helps, because doing that upfront work is really, really important in terms of, if you came to me, Mario, and you said, Dileep, I want you to buy a red car.
Yep.
And I want the car to be like this.
Okay.
And if I was a solution architect, I'd probably go in there and I'd say, okay, technically you've given me this. This is what we should do. But where an enterprise architect can really add value is, I'd ask you a few questions.
Okay.
Where are you traveling? How much mileage are you using? How many people are sitting in the car? Is it for business? Is it for just sort of a leisurely drive? But asking those right questions and giving those options is the most important part, I would say, because it actually joins up your strategy.
Yeah.
It actually joins up your technical aspects, because you might say to me, I want you to give me this car, but I don't have the tools to create that car, but I can create another car.
Okay.
So using those concepts and putting things together is really, really important. And I would question the fact when people say, we don't need an EA, we just need a solution architect. Are we actually asking those questions, and are we actually getting what we want in the end state?
And that brings me really nicely on to my next sort of question around the differences between an EA and an SA. Obviously, we all know them, right?
Yes.
But where do because what you just mentioned there around asking, where are you going and why does it have to be red and so on? For me, that's something a solution architect should be asking, because what's the point in architecting a solution if you don't know the requirements? And I get your point around enterprise looking at it at a high level, but how should, what are the key differences and how should the roles be defined so they're not, so there's no duplication of responsibilities there, because that just wastes money, time,
Sure.
and resource, really.
So I think some organizations have gone down the track where that solution architect can do some of that.
Yep.
But I would ask, does that solution architect actually have the capacity to do both? And are they actually forward planning?
Just to go back one step, some organizations expect their solution architect to do both.
Yeah.
Both what?
So what I mean by both is essentially expecting them to do the forward planning.
Yep.
So actually, where does the company want to go?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the strategy in a lot of detail.
Okay.
And actually coming together with a technical solution.
Yeah.
And also being that technical team who is actually driving that solution forwards as well.
Okay.
Now, when I've seen that, those teams have been huge. They've been very big teams, and people can be dedicated because they're dedicated to a very small area. But on the whole, where I've seen the value is essentially actually having that independence between the two, making sure that both, do they work together?
Mm-hmm.
In that there may be times where an EA should align on the strategy and the long-term business goals.
Yep.
An SA should actually design the technical solutions, but it's making sure that an EA opens the mindset.
Okay.
SA knows I've got all of these options. Whereas sometimes when you've just been doing an SA role without understanding the importance of an EA mindset, you can sometimes over solutionize in one area. Okay. So in terms of those two roles working together, what are the important things for me? I think the first thing is actually understanding the value that both bring. I think that's important. Seeing that both aren't competitors, rather we've actually got shared goals and outcomes. We're actually working to the same purpose. But then at the same time, it's making sure that there's support there. So if an EA is basically going down the route of saying you've got 5 options and I'm picking this one, that's probably going to irk the solution architect. Whereas them two working together and saying, let's discuss the pros and cons. Let's get a bit more information on option A rather than option B. That's the way that the two can actually work together. So I've seen the best teams where there is collaboration.
Yeah, of course.
There is working together. There's sharing of knowledge. Because in an enterprise solution company, it's impossible to know everything, right, Mario?
Yeah. Okay. So, but isn't there a bit of a conflict of interest between an SA and an EA in terms of, and this isn't everyone, by the way, but sort of holistically thinking, an EA is looking at long-term strategic alignment. That could be anywhere from 3 to 10 years in terms of delivering anything. An SA, solution architect, is probably a little bit more short to medium term, not necessarily overly strategic, but would probably prioritize speed and delivery. So how do you resolve the conflicts around that? Because there is a conflict of interest there, right? Speed isn't necessarily the best thing long term.
I think for me, so when I've been in these situations myself, it's actually making sure that, firstly, it's making sure there's a mutual respect, making sure that there's a way of the two working together.
Okay.
It's actually also selling the fact that rather than two people duplicating their efforts, let's actually command and conquer and do this together, such that we get to an end goal that's independent, and let's ask each other the right questions. So for me, I think it's about building that relationship between the two.
Okay.
And I think that's the important thing for me, such that there may be aspects that a solution architect is more specialized at. There may be aspects that a enterprise architect is better at. And it's the two actually working together and coming to an agreement such that they're working together. So if I think of some of my EA strategic papers that I'm working on, I'm not doing it in isolation.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is I'm speaking to the solution architect. I'm getting their knowledge of what's worked for you in the past, what hasn't worked for you in the past. Where are your thoughts?
Yeah.
And then I'm doing my research independently, and I might be speaking to Gartner. I might be speaking to people in the business. I might be using my experience, and then I'll get back together with that solution architect and I'll say, have you thought about this? That solution architect may say, I have thought about it, but I haven't thought about it in this detail. Can you help me with this?
Okay.
So I think it's about the two collaborating, and it's a bit like the relationship between a QA engineer and an engineer, right? An engineer will say, I can do all the automation.
Yeah.
They can, because they know the code. They've cut the code. They know it inside out. But that QA person actually coming in saying, wait a minute, have you actually thought about this? And that engineer has a light bulb moment to say, wait a minute, I didn't think about this. So I think actually the handoff is the most important.
Yeah.
The collaboration and way of working is most important, because imagine we're all the same, right? Imagine how annoyed you'd be as a solution architect if someone came to you, slapped a load of strategy slides on your table and said, you've got 2 weeks, project starts, go ahead, just work on it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think there's a way to approach it and a way of working between the two that is really, really integral, and that's key.
And one of the areas, the bones of contention between an EA and an SA, from my experience, and this is purely from us speaking to talented individuals, is around frameworks. And, an EA will always sort of refer back to a framework, whereas a solution architect historically would have come from a technical background, less framework driven, just as we said, speed and delivery. What's the real value of an architecture framework, and which do you recommend? And these are your personal views, obviously.
Sure. So my views at the moment, just because my mind's deep in an EA role, would obviously be what a framework's great. So for me, strategic alignment.
Yep.
It really helps you from a cost efficiency perspective.
Okay.
Agility and scalability comes to mind again. And the big one that I think a lot of people forget in the initial stages of a project is that risk mitigation. And normally people think, you know what, leave that to the program manager or leave that to the project manager. So it gives you a framework in terms of, it allows you to think about the right things. And that's why for me a framework has been great, because it allows me to actually say, do I know what the as-is architecture is?
Yeah.
What's my view on the to-be? What are the risks? What are the options? Is it hitting the cost brief? Am I going back to the strategy, and does that work? I'd probably say a favorite for me, just because I'm very sort of attention focused, is definitely TOGAF. So the Open Group Architecture Framework. And why I think this works really well, the architecture development method isn't just solely focused to say, enterprise architecture, you go and do this. It's actually getting solution architecture involved.
Yeah. Okay.
It's actually collaborating with other people in the business such that it's a shared framework. It's not just an EA framework. I think one thing for me where I think frameworks have been great based on my experience of even doing sort of the more senior roles like a fractional CTO, it's really helped in terms of when you've got siloed sort of systems and having standard integration patterns, frameworks really help with that. You can think more widely. When you've got really high IT complexity, a framework can help to simplify the architecture. And also at the same time, as we keep coming to it, it's actually getting things done quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I understand the counter, but for me, a lot of the time, and this is probably coming to your next question, apologies, it's making sure that the framework fits your needs.
Okay.
And I think there's a misconception where people look at TOGAF and say, I've looked at the architecture development method and there's like 8 different things I have to go through. This is going to take me ages. What's the point, right?
Yeah.
But what's important to me is it can be customized.
Okay.
It can actually meet your needs. It doesn't have to be that you have to go through it and do it exactly as it's written. What I would recommend is actually find a program or project of work that is short and gives a lot of value. Trial it, see what works.
Yeah, I think. Okay.
Correct, and keep going. Go back to your MVP. Do you need to do 8 quality gates? Can you get away with 3?
Okay.
And I think that's an important misconception that people have, and it scares them away from the frameworks. The frameworks actually are there to be customized. They're not there to be used per se.
Yeah, because most of the people I speak to, EAs and chief architects and heads of and whatnot, their common objection to TOGAF is that it is a bit too rigid. And that's why they struggle with it. So you've mentioned there, make it customizable. Go through 2 quality gates if you can rather than 8. Doesn't that then make it more invalid?
I wouldn't say so. I think TOGAF has been made in such a way that if you go back to your business strategy and your business objectives, if you're keeping those quality gates that relate to your strategy, then you're fine, right? For instance, if you say in your strategy, we want to lower our costs. If you're then taking out those quality gates for that, then yes, you've got a problem, right? So it actually forces you to understand the strategy and the business. And I think that's really powerful, Mario, because what you're doing is using a framework, you're forcing yourself to understand the business strategy. Yeah. And that's normally the biggest gap that people have, right? In that what happens is you're having lots of meetings and you're focusing so much on the tech.
Yeah.
Whereas what the framework does, it pulls you out and it actually forces you towards the business a bit more, which is exactly what an EA should be doing.
Okay. Yeah, and it's finding that right balance between customization and structure, I suppose. There are so many options out there, TOGAF, Zachman, SAFe, all of them. How should an organization decide, number one, whether to use a framework, and number two, a framework that best suits their needs? Because every business is different, right?
Correct. I think it's working out which framework meets your business needs the best. So it may be that you actually trial and use one and then actually move to something else.
Yeah.
I can't really come here and I mentioned TOGAF and that's just because I really like it, but I may be in a completely different industry and it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. There may be better frameworks out there. So I think it's a bit of trial and error. I think more so for me, if you're in a position where you're meeting your business needs, you're actually meeting all of those aspects that we mentioned before, like revenue, customer satisfaction, you've got good technical metrics. Mm-hmm. In that case, do you need a framework? Because it sounds like you've already created your own internal framework.
Yeah.
That you're using. So I think if there's a need and the data is pushing you in that direction, give it a go.
Okay.
If the lights are green and everything's perfect, it's probably something better you can do.
Yeah. Okay. How do you measure whether the framework is actually delivering value to the business and not just a theoretical exercise, or a scapegoat exercise. You know, some people, well, this isn't right, by the way, but might just say, right, I used TOGAF, it went wrong, but I went off TOGAF. You know, that's a governing body. It's a framework that most businesses use. It's not our fault we failed, kind of thing.
I think the first thing that's important is whenever implementing anything new, whether it be software or whether it be a framework or a tool, I think it's important to actually take people on that journey curve.
Yeah.
Making sure that people are sort of inputted in terms of what are the pros and cons, how would it work for their team, what are they worried about? And then I think what's important then is then to track how successful it was. So get data in terms of before the framework, how many projects were we actually delivering? What was the quality like? How many escape defects do we have? How many customers were happy?
Yeah.
What's the revenue impact? And then I think tracking over time to say what has been the change in those values could then push the fact that, yep, we think the framework's working, or we actually think we don't need to invest too much time in the framework because it's not making a difference.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to look at those measures and understand what's right for your business.
Okay, fair enough. So we're going to move on to the quickfire questions now.
Sure.
I think I already know the answer to this one, but if we can go into a bit more detail. What do you expect in 2025 will be a game changer from a tech perspective?
So you probably know I'm going to say AI because most people do say AI, so no surprise there, Mario. I think for me, there's creative skills really coming to a fore. And I think that's the great thing with an enterprise architect or a solution architect role, right? In that they are creative. You are an artist in a way. You are thinking outside the box. You're forward planning, but actually using AI to actually use it as a creative enabler. I think that will be the big change.
Okay.
So, and I think that could really add value in maybe in terms of training people, maybe in terms of looking at different models and collaborating together, because I think there's a bit of a misconception with AI in that a lot of us generally ask AI a question and it gives us an answer, right?
Yeah.
But you can actually use AI as sort of a rubber ducker, as they say, like when you're engineering, you're cutting some code and you're doing it for someone else. And that's the true value of AI in that just like I'm having a conversation with you at the moment, Aria, it's actually enabling a thought process such that have you thought about this?
Yeah. Oh, you're not having a conversation with me. I'm AI. I'm a robot.
I thought so.
From a career perspective, is there any advice you wish you received earlier on?
I think I touched on this earlier. So it's very easy initially in sort of a technical role, and I say architecture, whether it be enterprise architecture or solution architecture, it is a technical role. It's understanding that you don't need to know everything.
Yeah.
And you can learn from others. And I sort of said this before, it very much was asking questions, is very much being inquisitive. It's very much putting yourself in a user's shoes.
Yeah.
So those QA skills that I initially had have been really useful because I'm now using them in every role that I've had.
Yeah.
Whether it be a C-suite role or whether it be in an EA role, I'd say to people, really do hone those communication skills.
Yeah.
Really do learn from others.
Okay.
And I think be aware of your own biases. I think that's an important thing that I've had to really hone in on. But if I look back at my time at The Economist, if we used a particular technology, I really had to be aware of my biases in my next role, because whenever somebody mentioned something like a content system, my bias just went straight to where I was at The Economist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if somebody mentioned the cloud system, my bias takes me exactly where I was before. So I think what I'd say to people very early in their careers, having that understanding of bias and taking a step back.
Yeah.
Slow things down if you need to slow things down. And there's nothing wrong with actually having a thought process. So if somebody's pushing you on a decision, if you need more time, explain why.
Yeah.
Because that slowdown in process can have a really big impact on the long term.
Yeah. Okay. From an architecture perspective, what do you think? And, you know, you've worked at CTO level, you're advising CTOs and CIOs now. What do you think CIOs or CTOs actually care about?
So the big thing really is, are they getting the value for money? That will be the big thing. So as a CTO and CIO, key thing would be, I'm putting X amount of money in. What am I getting in return? What is my value on investment? So I think it's very important to, if I was putting myself in the architecture team shoes, how are we selling that value?
Mm-hmm.
What's the impact of us making those right decisions? If we don't make the right decision, what does it mean? And I think that's really important, such that you're collaborating and your journey piece is such that when a CIO or CTO looks at it, they actually know why that team exists.
Yeah. Okay. If you could ask one question and get a real honest answer from a CIO, CTO, what would that question be?
I think for me, it would probably be what really matters to a CIO and CTO, because normally when you look at a business strategy, it's really wide, right? It's really big. But I think one question that I would ask is, what keeps you up at night?
Okay.
What are you actually worried about?
Mm-hmm.
And that could really hone and push a team forwards. And when you have these town halls, Mario, I always say, I want to ask one question.
Yeah.
Normally the one question that I've asked in most roles, because it allows me to really hone in and say, am I actually thinking about this?
Yeah.
Or am I focusing on the wrong aspect?
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. What is your question to the next guest?
So the question that I thought of is, when we're thinking about sort of the future state and where architecture is going,
Mm-hmm.
How do we actually make sure that we're still current and we're in line with that? Because tech changes so quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that what we've planned, say now, but we want it to be forward thinking in 5 years' time?
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that we've made that right decision, and how do we make sure that we keep reviewing it?
Okay, brilliant. Great question. Listen out for the answer on the next episode. So sadly, Dileep, we've run out of time. So thank you so much for an excellent podcast episode. It's been really interesting to gather your thoughts, as I said, from right at the beginning, from your background and sort of career trajectory. So that's been fantastic. So it's been great chatting with you about enterprise architecture and why it's so key to digital transformation. So thank you once again for your time and for an excellent podcast episode.
Thanks for having me, Mario. Really enjoyed it.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Transformational Blueprints. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found plenty of insights and takeaways to fuel your journey. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could share it, leave a review, or give us a like. It helps us reach more people in the industry who can benefit from these conversations. Don't forget to follow Synaxia Group on LinkedIn to stay updated on new episodes. The links are in the show notes. Join us next time for more tips, strategies, and stories from some of the brightest minds in technology and transformation. Until then, take care and keep transforming.